This video is going to provide an overview of the reptiles, which live in Orange County, which is in the Northeast United States. But I'd like to just kind of begin by putting the emphasis on why local wildlife has to be valued, given that so much of the world's biodiversity is declining in abundance, including some species which are endangered and even becoming extinct. And so here you see turtles, which are on the United States endangered species list, from the sea turtles that you just saw to the alligator snapping turtle here, the largest freshwater turtle in North America, the second largest being the snapping turtle, which occurs in our area. And there are different degrees of being endangered. So there's some which are threatened and protected, but not, say close to extinction, such as the spotted turtle that you just saw, or the wood turtle. So even in our area, there are species which are on the endangered species list. Some, such as the bog turtle here, being more endangered than others. And so when we consider endangered species and biodiversity, obviously reptiles are very important. Now, one of the things hopefully you see here, and certainly the upcoming videos will make clear, notice that this is the only place in the world that this tortoise exists. The wood turtle of the previous spot, the red-bellied, the Plymouth red-bellied turtle, only here, the Alabama red-bellied turtle, only there, nowhere else in the world. And so when we look at biodiversity, very often we don't see it in that lens, that wherever you live, that could be protecting species which are dwindling. And so the habitat near you is important. And in some cases, it might actually be vital, because individual species, they can be quite limited. So biodiversity is important, and it varies based on geographic location. So for example, in Paraguay, where I lived, when I was in the Peace Corps, their reptiles include a number of different species of crocodiles. So crocodiles, the order, these are caimans specifically. And this would be different from, say, the American alligator and crocodile, which one can find in the United States. Paraguay has turtles, but not the turtles which we have in the United States, and include some of the long-necked turtles, which I will get back to, and some land-based tortoises. So not only can the types of reptiles vary from place to place, so crocodiles in one place and not others, but also even once turtles are present, there can be different species of turtles in different areas. And then when we look at lizards, notice that there really aren't lizards in the Northeast United States in great abundance. There are a couple of species which can be found. I have certainly looked and have yet to see one, even though I know people who have. So while lizards exist in the Northeast of the United States, they are not common. But when you look at other parts of the world, you can see lizards are quite diverse. So there are different families of lizards, different species in each family. So Paraguay is not that large a country. But nevertheless, look at the diversity of reptiles which occur here. And so as we value biodiversity, Paraguay needs to be valued because it has a unique set of reptiles which inhabit, just as our area, as I'll be getting to in just a second, needs to be valued. In addition to lizards and snakes, there is something which is equally related to both, known as worm lizards. The United States, none live in our area. And then when it comes to snakes, while there are snakes in our area and snakes in Paraguay, many of the snakes of Paraguay, such as the blind snakes, the thread snakes, the boas, etc., are not snakes which we find here. So notice that biodiversity, has this geographic component to it, with many being endemic to individual parts of the world, and diversity varying. So, while I'm going to emphasize why it's important that we value our biodiversity locally, it should be said that we need to be concerned about international biodiversity as well. So, for example, half of all animal and plant species are known from tropical rainforests, which are not the majority of Earth's surface. So hopefully, just by looking at these images from Paraguayan diversity, you get the idea that, while the northeast of the United States has snakes and Paraguay has snakes, Paraguay has far more. All right, so here are coral snakes. These are poisonous, which we don't have in Orange County. And then here are vipers, which then are also poisonous. And so biodiversity should always be treasured, but especially in those parts of the world where most of Earth's biodiversity lives, the areas which are closer to the equator. And so this was just a glimpse into that aspect of biodiversity having that geographic component. So with that, I'd like to now give a quick overview of the reptile biodiversity that one finds in Orange County in the Northeast United States. So here, I'd like to begin with turtles. Now, obviously, the key to a turtle is its shell, which is composed of thick ribs. So notice that the rib cage composes part of the shell. Dermal bones of the skin, so in the middle of the skin bone formed, which fuses with these ribs. And then there are hard scales known as scutes, which form over that. Also, turtles are kind of unique in that, notice my shoulder girdle is outside my rib cage. They actually have their shoulder girdle and pelvic girdle inside their rib cage, which makes them unique. And so turtles are reptiles. They no longer have any teeth. Their ancestors did. They are cold-blooded, which is why their food requirements are low, but also why you'll often see them, say, basking in the sun, because the sunlight helps them to warm up. As reptiles, they can lay their eggs on land. So this is a female snapping turtle laying her eggs on land, even though she spends most of her life in the water. The birds, reptiles, and mammals, amniotes, they modified their reproduction so that their eggs could develop on land. So amniotes practice internal fertilization, unlike what is typical in amphibians, and can lay their eggs on land, as you can see here with this painted turtle here. Now, as I'll mention, again, young turtles, such as this young painted turtle, or these turtle eggs, as you can see, this is when turtles are most vulnerable. So while they do have protection, and adult turtles are not as likely to suffer predation, lots of animals feed on turtle eggs and young turtles. So not only carnivores that you might expect, like foxes and raccoons, but a number of shorebirds, and even things like chipmunks can prey on eggs in nests. And so most turtle predation occurs on eggs as nests are dug up or on the very young. Now, there are different types of turtles throughout the world. Turtles are an old group. The first turtles date back to the Triassic period, which is when the first dinosaurs appeared. And then in the next period, the Jurassic period, there were representatives of the two groups that exist today, including the one which can cannot retract its necks. Those are called the Pleurodires, and they include long-necked turtles in southern continents today. And so this is the more primitive of the two groups of turtles, which cannot retract its necks inside its shell. And once again, just getting back to that point, as we look at biodiversity, much of it is endemic to specific regions, right? So notice here we have some linked to southern continents, which makes sense given that the southern continents were joined for a long time in a landmass. Some of these note that have very restricted habitats and thus can be in danger of extinction. If habitat is lost in one specific part of the world, that can be a threat. And so once again, turtles, while some have wide distributions, some have very narrow distributions, known only in very limited areas. All of the turtles in North America belong to the cryptodires. The cryptodires are the ones which can retract their necks inside their shells. And there are several families which exist in our area. The snapping turtle is the only member of its family in our area, because the alligator snapping turtle that you saw in a previous image, they exist in the, and you can see here as well, they exist in the South, say in the Mississippi, where they are protected, being threatened. The snapping turtle is the largest turtle in our area. Here's once again the alligator snapping turtle. And so it perhaps is seen at best when one is in swampy environments, and I'll get to laying eggs in just a second. So let me say that now. So here's the snapping turtle, and the females often migrate quite a distance in order to lay their eggs. So they will leave the wetland where they are typically found, and then travel even a couple miles to lay their eggs and then return. So it is impossible to encounter them in these travels. Obviously that puts them at a bit of risk. So here you see female snapping turtles which have left the wetland where they were, traveling variable distances. They're digging holes with their back legs in order to lay their eggs. Snapping turtle mating can take a bit of time and can result in some minor injuries on both the male and the females. So if you are canoeing or kayaking in a swamp in late spring, early summer, one can then encounter just snapping turtles, and you'll see that over the course of a considerable length of time that one is underwater for a while, or there's clawing and scraping, etc. This video goes on for a bit, and feel free to watch it to a greater degree if you would like. Snapping turtles are get to be very large, and so therefore they are apex predators in their environment when they are mature, being able to feed on fish, even large fish, but they can feed in addition on frogs. They can even feed on young ducks, ducklings, snakes. Snapping turtles are large enough that they are major predators in aquatic environments, and being very stealthy, they can sneak up on prey from underneath the water. They move very slowly, etc. Of the turtles which can pull their necks inside the shell, there are different families. And once again, you can see here there are different families which are found in different regions of the world. So turtles occur in groups. And as I go through these, you can see that there are some which are in danger of extinction because of how small their geographic range is. The family Immididae is includes the most common turtles in our area, the painted turtles. So in terms of numbers, there are more painted turtles than any other turtle. If you were to turn a painted turtle over and look at its plastron, so a turtle shell, the bottom part is called the plastron, the upper portion is called the carapace. You'll notice that they have different patterns, and one can identify different subspecies of a painted turtle, often by looking at these patterns. The coloration can vary a little bit in the subspecies. Here you see a young painted turtle here. Their diet can vary over the course of their life. They're capable of both including animals like small fish and aquatic invertebrates in their diet, but then also they can include aquatic vegetation like duckweed. And so they're capable of eating both plant and animal material. They do vary in their color, as I mentioned with subspecies. Here was one you'll notice is exceptionally red. This is odd. It's a painted turtle. It was just a variant, just as there are dogs that have different colors and appearances compared to typical dogs, and then the same is true here. Notice the claws on this one are quite long. Sometimes you can distinguish between males and females through a variety of features, such as the length of their claws. And so long claws may be a sign of, it may be an indication of male turtles, for example, in the painted turtle. There are other turtles in our area, including the spotted turtle, whose numbers are a bit of a concern, and therefore it is protected. So it's like painted turtles, but notice the different coloration patterns here. Once again, the spotted turtle, you can see that there. Box turtles are a bit more terrestrial. And so they'll eat more vegetation, including plant material. Mushrooms are commonly eaten. They are called box turtles because there's a hinge in the lower portion of their shell, their plastron, that allows them to close it and then be able to protect their arms, legs, and heads, even to a greater degree than most turtles can. And so if you're walking in the woods far from water, one can encounter box turtles, which are then fully terrestrial and not as likely to be near water as others. So there you can see the hinge in the box. Wood turtles are also dwindling in number. They are often, have a bit of a reddish color here. They are larger turtles that one can find in the terrestrial environments. They're capable even of some climbing, but then one can even find them in aquatic environments as well. And so wood turtles are native to our area. The most uncommon turtle in our area is the bog turtle. It is in danger of extinction. It's a small turtle, and it is the modification of habitat, which is its primary threat. So in our area, there is the change in the habitat because of, say, purple loosestrife, an invasive plant, is modifying wetlands to the detriment of bog turtles. So many things threaten bog turtles, such as the development of wetlands, the draining of swamps, etc. But then even invasive species affecting wetlands. One last turtle which lives in our area but not as commonly seen are musk turtles. Musk turtles can actually spend much of their life essentially buried in mud and so therefore are not typically seen, but this is one additional type of turtle in our area. Here's a young musk turtle there. Okay, so here's the underside of the musk turtle. And so note that turtle diversity varies throughout the world, with different families, different species being linked to specific areas of the world, and many are endangered to varying degrees, whether it be threatened or greatly endangered. And this would even include turtles which live in our area, include some which are endangered. So once again, there are no crocodilians. There are no crocodilians which live in our area. Lizards are rare, although technically one or two species of lizard can be found in our area. And so then apart from turtles in the Northeast United States, the major reptiles which would be found would be snakes. Snakes have a lot of modifications, such as modifications of the skull and jaws so that they can engulf objects larger than their mouths when closed. And one can see that the snake body plan has been made by simply repeating the elements of the skeleton, so they have far more vertebrae in their vertebral column, with the least number being over 100. Typical snakes having about 300 vertebrae, but one snake actually going up to 500 in the fossil record. This garter snake just ate a toad, and the toad was larger than the head, but just the ability of the jaws, which are not joined in the middle, which can then expand, allowed it to eat such a large object. And you can observe the remains of the toad going through the digestive tract here in the snake as it swallows it. So the earliest snakes in the fossil record still possess remnants of legs, and one is actually even known that has arms as well, but all modern snakes lack these limbs, although, as I'll point out, there are actually little bony spurs in the most primitive snakes alive today. Snakes, like typical vertebrates, have a sensory organ on the roof of their mouth known as the vomeronasal organ. So when a snake sticks out its tongue, it's trying to grab odorants from the air so that they can be introduced to this vomeronasal organ, which allow the snake to smell. Now, the amphibians need to keep their skin moist because to a large extent they're breathing through their skin. And once again, those plethodontid salamanders no longer even have lungs, so they are breathing entirely through their skin. Now that reptiles are now using their rib cage to change the volume of their thorax and bring air in and out of their lungs, that freed their skin to develop these hard keratinized scales. Keratin is the same protein which makes up our outer skin, but also our hair and our nails. And so as this helps snakes live in dry, arid areas, because now this watertight layer of keratin helps to protect them from water loss. When they to grow, they need to shed these scales. Each time rattlesnakes shed their scales, one bead of the rattle is left on the tip of their tail. So here's a rattlesnake which has obviously a number of beads in its rattle. This is an older snake. So once again, every time that it sheds its skin, a bead is left on the rattle. Some snakes have coloration for camouflage, others for warning, such as the poisonous coral snakes These are coral snakes from South America here. And then there are even some harmless snakes which mimic the coral snakes, so that predators who avoid poisonous coral snakes would then also avoid the non-venomous snakes which look like them. All right, so this is a poisonous coral snake from South America. That's a non-venomous snake from South America. So scales can be modified. Here in the eyelash viper, you can see some modified scales there. Snakes are very important, not only in and of themselves, because they serve parts of food chains. They are important in controlling a number of invertebrate species. So here's a small snake, the ringneck snake, which would obviously be feeding on smaller items such as worms. Some snakes eat eggs as a major part of their diet, such as the black rat snake, which can climb, as you'll see presently. But some, such as the pit vipers, are very good at preying on rodents. So not only are snakes predators, but then they're also preyed upon. And there are a number of mammals, such as like foxes and other carnivores, which can feed on snakes. But a number of birds feed on snakes. Snakes near water can be food sources for a number of animals as well. Snakes and lizards have an unusual feature in reproduction where they possess what are known as hemipenes in males, where males possess a pair of penises, although only one is used at a time. In the most primitive snakes, as I had mentioned, like in the boas and anacondas, and you'll see that here, there's still a tiny little spur where the remnants of the hind legs were. So these are water snakes. And notice that these water snakes live in water, but they can mate on land, they can lay their eggs on land. So as reptiles, they are more free from relying on water. Here is an example of hemipenes in this snake and in this snake here. And there's that little bony spur, which is a vestige of limbs. Many snakes lay eggs, but many give live birth. Snake has live birth has evolved multiple times in both snakes and lizards. So there are snakes which give live birth, snakes which lay eggs, lizards which give live birth, lizards which lay eggs, and also often in individual families, you'll see a variation in ones where some members of a family give live birth and others lay eggs. All right, so rattlesnakes, copperheads give live birth, as do garter snakes and red-bellied snakes, while many snakes lay eggs. And so there are different families of snakes, many of which do not occur in the United States. Once again, one of the reasons for treasuring local biodiversity is that it's unique. The reptiles which live in your area may not be widespread elsewhere. And so the protections they receive in your area is important for their overall survival. And so when we look at, the groups of snakes, snakes are a suborder, and then there are different families. And notice that some families, have a limited geographic distribution, not being found in the Northeast United States, such as these blind snakes and thread snakes here, or these boas and pythons. There are venomous snakes, and snake venom is just a modified set of salivary productions. And so if we wanted to be technical, even a lot of snakes, which we call harmless snakes, actually make venom. It's just that they typically lack the fangs with which they can inject this venom. And while this set of toxins, et cetera, can be dangerous for what they eat, it doesn't really threaten humans. Now, one must be careful because there is a family of snakes known as the colubrids, the harmless snakes. But among them, there are a couple where if a human got bitten, it could actually make them sick and even in rare cases cause deaths, such as the boomslang. And so one can't be too arrogant with saying, oh, these are harmless snakes. Snake venom is just modified set of secretions, and lots of snakes make them, even ones which are, quote, in the harmless group. But in general, the two groups of poisonous snakes are the elapid snakes, which include coral snakes in North America, which do not live in our area, but then also cobras, right? So this is an interesting group of snakes. Some are in danger of extinction, as I mentioned here. The majority of the snakes which live in our area are the harmless snakes, the Colubridae family, or the colubrid snakes. And so this is the most common group of snakes throughout the world. And I have, some information on how one would distinguish between these. One obvious difference is if you look at the head, you can see how rounded it is, and that's different from the vipers, which tend to be thicker snakes and have a triangular head. So very commonly, I've been around water where someone says, look, I think we see a cottonmouth, it's poisonous, be careful, we should kill it. But it's not a cottonmouth, because a cottonmouth is a viper. It's a thick snake with a triangular head. What they're looking at is a water snake, which is a colubrid, a harmless snake with a round head. As you can see here, the colubrid snakes are very widespread geographically. So there are so many colubrid snakes that then we break them into subfamilies. And once again, the subfamilies have different distributions throughout the world. I go into the subfamilies a little bit, but I'd like to jump to just introducing the major snakes which occur in our region. Black rat snakes can reach considerable lengths, more than 4 feet long. So they're black in their body. They typically have white underneath their mouth and on some of their underside. They are very good at climbing. And so as such, one might occasionally see them climbing up a tree or in a tree. And here they can prey on birds, and they are a major nest predator. So birds nest in trees, which then means that their eggs are protected from most predators. But here you can see this black rat snake slowly going up the trunk of this tree, and thus any bird's nest would potentially be something that it could prey on. And so as this video goes on, this black rat snake is going very high in the tree. And so therefore, if you're walking in the woods, one of the questions, is there could actually be snakes above you. Another type of all black snake found in our area is the black racer. They tend to be a bit more slender and not as likely to climb. Milk snakes are very colorful snakes. Like all snakes, they are carnivores. All right, so no snakes, are feeding on plant material, and so these snakes are primarily going to be feeding on insects, on amphibians like salamanders and frogs, and smaller reptiles. So it could feed on younger snakes as well. Water snakes are fairly large snakes which occur in our area and are typically associated with water, where they can feed on fish, they can feed on frogs, and they can feed on aquatic salamanders, etc. And as such, they're important in aquatic food chains. So not only are they predators, but large fish can feed on young snakes, a number of aquatic birds, such as herons, and then even, hawks, eagles, ospreys can feed on water snakes. And so when they've recently shed, one can make out an obvious light brown to dark brown pattern on their backs. But if they haven't shed recently, they might look in generally just more of a solid dark brown. And garter snakes are common snakes in our area. And actually, there's a closely related species known as a ribbon snake, where the striping might be a bit more bright. And so garter snakes and ribbon snakes are similar as snakes in our area. They're major predators of insects. Ringneck snakes are much smaller snakes, and their mouths obviously are very, very small. So this greatly limits, the size of the prey that they would be able to ingest. So they are, going to be primarily feeding on small invertebrates. These ring-necked snakes you can see here. Now, snakes very often are, hiding under logs, etc. So very often there's a diversity of snakes in our area that you may not come encountered with. So this is what's known as a red-bellied snake. And so this one was dead by the side of the road, and you can see, it's dead on, it's red on its underside. And then there's also a snake known as a brown snake, which just kind of has a solid brown pattern to it. So these were the snakes of the family Colubridae, the harmless snakes. Now, the poisonous snakes that live in the Northeast United States, these belong to the family Viperidae, the vipers. They tend to have stouter bodies, a triangular head, and they have fangs with which they can inject their venom. Now, they are called the pit vipers because if you were to look at the tip of the snout, there are these two extra openings, two holes or pits, which one can see here. And these are sensory structures which are detecting heat because they are hunting rodents primarily. They can then hunt them at night by picking up a heat signature and noticing where more warm-blooded animals are, so they can hunt and strike rodents accurately even at night when they can't see them, because they can pick up the temperature differences around them. Now, vipers are distributed all throughout the world. Some are in danger of extinction. In our area, because we're too far north to get the cottonmouth, you'd need to be, in the vicinity of Virginia or farther south to encounter cottonmouths. Our vipers would be the copperhead and the rattlesnake. So here's a copperhead. Notice it looks different from a water snake, a stouter body, a more triangular head, but also notice those the prominent pits there, which once again allow it to detect heat. Here you see images of a timber rattlesnake. Now, timber rattlesnakes are not as dangerous as the larger diamondback rattlesnake, but nevertheless, bites from timber rattlesnakes, can be serious and even potentially fatal for humans. So obviously, care should always be taken near a rattlesnake. Notice it has this stout body and a more triangular head. You'll see it again here in a second. Rattlesnakes are protected by law. So I know many people, associate rattlesnakes with danger, and say if you were in a state park, someone might say, "Oh, I saw a rattlesnake and I killed it. That was good, right?" Well, no, you could be then fined because that's against the law. Rattlesnakes are protected by law, so that's something that not a lot of people appreciate. But here you can see a coiled rattlesnake. Diamondbacks used to be more widely distributed in our area, but they've been hunted to the point where their current range is much less than it once was, although timber rattlesnakes, and here's a young timber rattlesnake here, can still be found in our area. So there's a young timber rattlesnake there. This next video was taken in the state of Virginia, where cottonmouths do occur. And so once again, a lot of people, I've heard them, they associate, any snake near water with a poisonous cottonmouth. In the Northeast United States, cottonmouths don't live this far north, but plus, once again, even just by looking at the shape and the coloration, but also the triangular head, one can distinguish between cottonmouths and water snakes. Notice the head more triangular, wider there. So I began with the idea that we are living in what we fear is the second worst mass extinction in the history of life on Earth, certainly in the past 500 million years, tied with that which did in the dinosaurs. And the human impact on the natural world with the loss of habitat, the hunting, the climate change, and all of these other effects that humanity causes is having a great effect on biodiversity. And because biodiversity is often endemic to specific regions, the reptiles which live near you, they're unique. And so therefore, many are actually endangered, and if they're not preserved in your area, then this then threatens the survival of the species in general. So this was an introduction to those who live, in the Northeast United States, of some of the reptiles which live around.